My name's Simon. I'm 43 and work as a head of faculty in a special education school. Today, I'd like to share a deeply personal chapter in my life, one that changed me forever. It's the story of my beautiful daughter, Bethany. In 2010, she sadly passed away from a sudden arrhythmic death. She was only 3 years old. The night before, Bethany seemed fine except for a high temperature, which we managed with the usual medication. And the following day, I found Bethany unresponsive. And whilst I was in survival mode, I began performing CPR while my wife called for an ambulance. They rushed Bethany to the hospital and we followed in a second ambulance. Despite the efforts of the medical team, Bethany couldn't be revived. It was at the moment that my emotions then switched back on and hit me like a freight train, holding on to her lifeless body saying, "I'm so sorry." I felt like I was drowning from the weight of guilt. I questioned my worth as a father, feeling like a complete failure. In the following months, I tried to find a sense of normality. Unfortunately, the burden of guilt led me into a deep depression that lingers even today. It affected my relationships, including those with my employers, as they could see I was in a survival mode, forever changed by a tragedy that hit us. In search of stability and a fresh start, I agreed to take a secondment, hoping a change of scenery would facilitate healing. But despite the temporary relief, I felt a sense of being replaced in my original role, which fueled my uncertainties and vulnerability. I needed more than anything stability during this trying time, and I perceived what was happening very differently to my colleagues and employers. Feeling isolated and still in survival mode, I earned a promotion and moved to a different school. In addition to the desire to prove to myself, it was also an opportunity to grow and rebuild my shattered self-esteem. In the years after Bethany's death, I was trapped in a cycle. I would start strong in a new role, but questioning or criticism would trigger a defensive reaction, and then I would just move to another school. This in turn strained my relationships with employers, leading to further setbacks. It felt like a never-ending cycle which damaged my employability in the eyes of prospective employers. Then, after about 5 years, I was diagnosed with dilated cardiomyopathy. This condition affects the heart's ability to pump blood efficiently. As my whole family was investigated for the same condition, it became clear that I was the only one in our family history to develop this disease. This revelation suggests that the pain and stress I experienced after Bethany's death likely took a toll on my heart. The burden of grief strained not only my emotional well-being, but also my physical health. And in 2017, I hit a breaking point. The pain, the stress, and the unresolved grief had caught up with me, and the toll on my mental and physical health led towards significant burnout. It was a sobering moment that forced me to confront the extent of the damage I had endured since Bethany's death. At that point, I sought professional help, engaged in therapy, and implemented self-care practices to foster recovery. It's important to remember that healing from trauma takes time and patience. It requires acknowledging the pain we carry within and committing to our own well-being. After sharing my story with my GP, he picked up on several autistic traits and suggested further exploration. And this was a pivotal moment in 2019 where I received a formal diagnosis of autism. And from that point onwards, my life changed for the better. When I first received the diagnosis, I actually cried. Not because I was diagnosed with autism, but because it brought immense relief. Finally, there was an explanation for why I could shut off my emotions during crisis moments and was in a repeated destructive cycle within employment. In the following years, I delved into understanding neurodiversity more and my own unique strengths. By embracing my neurodiversity, focusing on my abilities and rebuilding my emotional intelligence, I found greater control over my depression. I felt newfound confidence, gradually letting go of the feeling of being a failure as a father, and subsequently breaking that destructive cycle with employment. However, I have still found that there are employers that struggle to understand neurodiversity, depression, and the effects of heart failure. So whilst reflecting upon my experiences, I actually completed an MBA with distinction, where I focused on the vital topic of neurodiversity inclusion within the education workforce. It allowed me to deepen my understanding of creating neuro-inclusive environments within educational institutions that I am now taking forward into a Doctor of Education research. So my advice for leaders is that within a world that often misunderstands child bereavement, the emotional pain and neurodiversity, develop a greater understanding of the social model of disability and create a consistent dialogue with your neurodivergent employees, as they often have the emergent strategies you need to work towards a neuro-inclusive and compassionate working environment. My advice for fellow neurodivergent people is to embrace your unique experiences and let them guide you towards personal growth and positive change. And remember that no matter what challenges you face, you have the strength to overcome them. Thank you all for listening to my story, and thank you to Unveil for allowing me to share my emotional resilience and rediscovery journey.